Well, good afternoon, morning, wherever you are in your part of the United States. My name is David Collier King, and I am a Central District Coordinator with the Fraternity Service Center for Chapter Development. And I am excited today to close out Black History Month with our special guest, who is also one of our brothers. He is the first African American member elected to the Supreme Council for Sigma Alpha Epsilon fraternity. Join me in welcoming Brother Ben Johnson.
Thank you, David. Nice to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. It is awesome to have you. And so I just want to jump right in, really honestly, and start talking about
That's good to start.
So just to start off, tell us a little bit about yourself. You know, what brought you to SAE, your story, and how you got your start here with the fraternity.
Yeah, thank you. I think like a lot of people, I was a little bit older when I joined SAE. I went to UC-Irvine and was almost a Phi Delt. I think back to that experience. I had a couple friends that were, and I was relatively new to the area, and I liked fraternity life. My brother was in a fraternity at Penn State. He was in Omega, and but I really just wanted that experience, and I wanted it to be part of a national fraternity, not a local fraternity. And I was actually going to go back to the second night at Phi Delta's event, and there was a tabling set up, and there were not undergraduates, but what I'm now know were alumni that had a booth set up, and they were starting a colony of SAE, and I talked to them, and I still can remember clearly the Phoenix was open, and I kind of paged through and saw some celebrities that were part of our past, but then I read The True Gentleman, and I was hooked, and then meeting the people that they were selecting to help start the colony, and just those guys themselves and the way they talked about their experience, and they really kept reinforcing not just the social aspects, but the community-backed aspects, philanthropy, and giving back to your community. That's really important. I mean, it was important to me then too, and then I was actually council to run for our EDA, and so was really just full in from the moment I joined the organization, because we are a fraternity, and I don't use the shortened version because it's a negative version. We're a fraternity, and it's been an important part of my life.
Okay, yeah, good stuff, good stuff. Your story is somewhat similar to mine. That is how I joined. I was connected through the True Gentleman. That is what sparked my continued efforts to join. But what really caught my eye was they were tabling SAE at IUPUI was tabling at what was normally a Black Greek event.
Wow.
And it was really cool just to know that they felt comfortable enough to be in that environment and to communicate with people. I was interested in joining Alpha, but because of my own feelings about how they carried themselves in the chapter itself, I was just like, no, you know what? But then I turned around, and right next to them was the SAE table, and on it was the True Gentleman, and I'm like,
Yeah.
but all of those values seem to be the personal values that I hold. So that's good stuff to know that there's a common thread that pulls us together, and that most likely pricks at people's hearts when they decide to join SAE.
Well, it's so aspirational, right? I mean, we talk about this all the time. There's not a point wherever I go, oh yeah, I've got this down now. I've got this whole True Gentleman thing now. Because if you really truly read it and you think about it, we'll never achieve, right? And people sometimes criticize and say, well, you're not living. Well, no, they're aspirational values. They're values that we try to live, and we continue to try to grow and get better. Um, but none of us are perfect, and none of us walk on water. None of us will ever be able to achieve that kind of level of what we want to be. But if we continue to try to strive for it, we're much better in how we live and our character and just how we kind of give back to our community and each other if we continue to think about that in different parts of it from day to day.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. And so it was off of this conversation of the true gentleman, it leads me to kind of this next focus of, we all have seen what has happened within this last year,
Yeah.
of the social unrest, the injustices, the inequalities in terms of police brutality, happening for Black people, but also in minority communities in general.
Hmm.
Um, as we look and reflect on our creed, the true gentleman, and we think about those values that are in there, how do you think that tells us as a fraternity and as a brotherhood we should respond?
Well, wow, that's a great question. We are not a social justice organization, but we're an organization of human beings where our brothers are impacted by that, right? I mean, I, I'm a little bit older than you are. That's putting it mildly. And I've had experiences in my life, even as an undergraduate, driving, being pulled over, thrown to the ground. Um, and so those things don't define my life, but those things have happened. And so when people don't understand because they haven't experienced it, um, it is a difficult conversation, but it's one we have to start having with each other, right? It's one that when somebody says to me, this doesn't happen anymore, well, it does still happen. Um, for those of us that have known people that have gone through not being murdered, obviously, but being brutalized by anyone in authority, um, that's not a surprise
Mhm.
because we live it. So I do think that as brothers, we always encourage our brothers to be involved with our communities, and we talk about bystander behavior, or we talk about this. Um, you just said a true gentleman, right? If we're concerned about our communities, if we're concerned about the world that we live in, then none of us should stand by and want and allow this to happen. And if you don't think it happens, then have a conversation with someone that can tell you it does. That by no means is trying to say that every police officer out there is not doing the best job and somehow putting all police in one category, because I don't believe in that. I have too many friends and brothers, and quite frankly, that's what I wanted to do when I graduated college. At first was to be a police officer. So most out there doing an amazing job, but that does not negate. You don't need 1,000 out of 1,000 to make things an issue, right? You need anybody that has that kind of authority. Um, you've got to call it out. And we also have to call out the fact that we don't talk about these things enough. We don't have these kind of courageous conversations that we should be having to really kind of understand each other. And we hope we're going to get better at that. I know that our Equity, Inclusion, and Diversity Committee is looking at some things we can do to make uncomfortable conversations a little more comfortable, right? Because um, they're painful for people. I've talked to brothers that have been through things in a wide variety of spectrums of not just my fellow Black brothers, but brothers that kind of you can talk the whole gamut of issues and how they haven't always felt comfortable depending on where they've gone. And that's one thing that should never happen, right? We are all brothers, right? We are all sons of Minerva, and we should all feel comfortable no matter where you're going in this country. So, without getting too much of my rambling here, I think the first thing that we need to do, we need to encourage our brothers to be involved on their campuses and be active and speak out when you see things that go don't that shouldn't happen. Oklahoma, for example, is probably one of the best examples that we experienced in our own brotherhood, where um, that doesn't represent every brother in Oklahoma or their alumni, but it did represent those guys on those buses, right? And if one guy just one guy would have stood up and said, sit down, and held that person accountable, it would have been a different turnout, and it would have showed that we are living our values. But the fact that no one did and others joined in, it reinforces that there's work that needs to be done, and we can't just brush it off. But what I will say, that says more about that campus and that campus culture too than it does about SAE, because SAE looks different on every chapter that you go to, right? And so we need to own where we're great. We need to clap when we do things that are well. We need to tell our story. We can't let other people tell our story. That's one of the things that frustrates me the most, because anytime anything bad happens in our organization, they call us a frat, and they put us in this category, and they don't talk about the other, thousands of things that we do that are positive, not only for our communities, but for each other.
Mhm. No, definitely, definitely. And that 2015 incident definitely was something that um, struck for me, because I remember I was sitting on the couch when it came across the TV screen, and I had a group of friends around me, and they all looked at me and they're like, well, how do you feel?
Yeah.
And that feeling that an organization that you chose, which I think for me it was really all of the values. It had nothing to do with the skin color of the members or anything like that. It was all about the values, but knowing that even then there are people in that organization who have values that would negate my experiences as a Black man.
Correct.
I think that was an awakening moment, and I think that we have to get to a point as a fraternity where we're able to have those conversations and talk openly about those experiences.
I do know, and you and I and probably others were chastised at times. I know I was chastised by several people. How could I be part of an organization like this? And first of all, I had to put it in perspective and say, that's not our entire organization by any stretch of the imagination, right? That doesn't represent the people that I know. And I forgot who I was talking to recently. We were talking about our undergraduate experience. It may have been Mark McDonough, and we were talking about how our postgraduate experience is even better, right? Because you connect with more people than you ever would have. You see more people, and there's a broader range of experiences and ages and all the things that from all the different diversities, our organizations, and all those things that are great, right? That help you grow as I can't speak for anybody else, but helps me grow as an individual. And then to have this blemish happen, but again, my issue was we should have been able to go out there and say, here's our story, right? Here's who we really are. And we need to build it within our organization to start telling our narrative in a very thoughtful manner. So when somebody does something, because we're human beings, right? People will do stupid stuff or insensitive stuff, or even stuff that you consider bigoted or racist, right? To think that with all the people we have in our organization, something couldn't happen again, it's probably just when. And we need to make sure that we continue to do all that we can to make sure the right people are part of our brotherhood, but also to make sure that we are continuing to educate people. Because when people have questions, and as you said a minute ago, David, if we can't have these kind of conversations, someone asking you a question does not make that person racist, right? It makes them asking you a question. So we need to create an environment where people feel comfortable doing that, and where we're building a culture that no matter where they're tabling, like you had an experience, right? That kind of environment where it could happen anywhere, right? And we should be anywhere. We should be on any campus that has good men. And historically Black colleges, in my mind, is where we should be going next.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I am a graduate of historically Black University, Alabama State in Montgomery, Alabama.
Mhm.
And literally steps away from the cradle of the Confederacy. We are steps away from the Confederate State House. We are steps away from Jefferson Davis, his home. There were so many different experiences that happened there, but being on that campus really allowed me to do some things. But the one thing that was missing that I really wanted to dive into was the fraternity that I had joined for life.
That's right.
So when I transferred from IUPUI, I transferred to ASU, and literally just kind of lost this connection with the fraternity because there was not one on the campus. How do we get to a point that, as a fraternity, we can move forward to say, hey, we've got an SAE chapter on Alabama State's campus or A&M or Florida A&M?
We need to hire more people because we can't do everything. But I think part of it is we need to be able to show intentionality, right? That as I mentioned before, we need to own our past, and we need to talk about where we've been, where we are now, and where we want to go, right? And it can't be happenstance. It can't be it needs to be real. That's probably the best way to say it. It needs to be real, and it needs to be not just in the West. It needs to be across the realm, right? As I've talked to brothers that have said they were attending events and at first didn't think they would, be welcomed, and then they're surprised that they are, because most of our brothers, right, they want good guys involved with the organization, no matter what they look like, no matter their ethnicity, their sexual orientation. We want true gentlemen, right? And so if we do that, but I'll say this: if you're tabling, and I just use this as an example because it could be any kind of recruiting, whether it's for alumni groups or for undergraduate groups, make sure the people at the table, like if it was if SAE would have had a bunch of jocks around the table, I probably wouldn't have gone to that table, right? Because I would have wondered if so. Anytime we think about our recruitment process, we need to think about, are we really being intentional about our recruitment process? That's where it all starts. And it also starts where we expand, right? So if we want to grow as an organization and be a diverse organization where we recruit, where our expansion efforts, and then how do we, even on our campuses that we're doing well, how do we continue to teach our brothers to be mindful, and I keep using that word, but being intentional about who they ask to come to the group, right? Because it's not up to the person that's interested to walk up to us. It's up to us to walk up to them and seek them out and make them feel like, I'm going to say the word, they're not just going to be a token, blah, 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 but that there is truth in the fact that if we say we want true gentlemen, we think you have that, right? We think you're a gentleman. And so we want you to come and hang out with us. That's all it is, right? But it's just, that I'm going to date myself, but it's like that old Prel commercial, right? They told two friends and they told two friends. And if we keep telling two friends and they tell two friends, and we're building capacity with guys that we think, and if we even think long term, right? We think about, are we even thinking about, is this guy going to be around not just for the 2-4 years or whatever he has left in his experience, but is that person going to be around for life, right? Because if the guy is just into drinking and hanging out, they're not going to be the one that's going to come and help you with your alumni association. They're going to be fun for a period, but they're not going to be the one that hangs out. And maybe that's why we don't have as many people involved at their postgraduate, because maybe we're not being as intentional as we should be just from that perspective, right? So it helps us in so many ways, but it's the right thing to do as well.
Yeah, and what I hear is recognition and honoring diversity. Those are two things that I think are extremely key when you're talking about recruitment, or even if you're just talking about as a fraternity operating, recognizing, honoring diversity of our membership, of our alums, and honoring where they come from, those cultural differences, those personality differences, those different things that
Right.
make us the unique individuals that we are. And so when I think about Black History Month, it's a time for us to honor that history, to tell those stories, that trauma, those painful things, but also looking forward and thinking about how do we overcome those challenges? How do we build a path forward? And how do we develop this forward motion of progress? And I think to get to this next portion, you are the first African American elected to SAE Supreme Council. And for me in 2019, or when you were elected, watching that was almost like it's possible. This can be done. It's almost like going back and watching the election of President Obama. As a person who grew
Well,
up at the age of 5, no. And as a person who grew up since the age of 5, wanting to be the president, watching President Obama become the 44th president, and then watching his presidency, and then to turn around in the fraternity, who just 5 years ago or 6 years ago had this incident, elect an African American to their Supreme Council, lets me know as a Black kid from Gary that it's possible, that you can get up there and make change. So how do you think your accomplishment, what do you think it means for the fraternity now, and for the fraternity moving forward, specifically for young African American men who may not have started their collegiate careers yet and would possibly consider SAE?
well, I'm humbled by your comments. Thank you. Um, and I'll probably get choked up talking about this, so forgive me up front. But I said, and I meant it, and it sticks in my head frequently, and it came from the heart. But it says more about my election. Says, I hope it says people. Well, I do believe it says people believed what I had to offer, but it also says more about our members than it does about me, right? It shows that, to your comments, that this incident, right? This incident that happened um, was an incident, right? It shouldn't define us. It's a reminder, right? It's a reminder of what things can happen. But if we don't start, because anytime anything happens with our organization, the first thing the news report does is it reawakens that sludge, right? That sludge comes back up, and universities that were feeling good about us get that taste in their mouth, right? It's that, like that thing in Shawshank, right? We've crawled through it already, we're out, and then somebody pulls us back through again. So for all you Shawshank, it's the very ending where he's escaping out of prison, right? Um, so what it says for me is I don't take it lightly. I really don't. I've been fortunate enough. I was on a school board in Southern California, about 21, that pretty decent sized school district, 21,000 students, 23 at our peak, and was the first and only person and Black person elected to that board, and I served there for 21 years. And I say that because I thought about that every time I walked in that dais, or tried to remember. I represent all students, right? I'm not the Black board member. I'm a member who happens to be Black. So I serve all of our members equally, and that's my charge. But I'm not unaware of the fact that if someone's thinking about our organization, and if I wasn't there, and if there aren't other people there, would they feel welcome, right? And so it doesn't mean that there isn't a welcome environment, but when you do look at leadership in any organization, whether it's SAE or a Fortune 500 or Fortune 100 company, and you look at the board of directors and you don't see diversity in that, you wonder, your question, can I? And so um, I hope that what it means is that anyone, right, will look at any of our members, but hopefully they'll say that, well, if that guy can do it, I can do it, right? That's what I'm hoping that they think, right? That it is possible, and we continue to grow, right? We continue to show that um, content of character. I'm stealing one of the most famous lines ever, right? But content of character is all that should matter, and it doesn't mean by any stretch of the imagination I'm close to perfect. I'm a flawed, failed human being, but my goal is to try to live our values and to serve our brothers. And so I hope brothers that want to do something um, think about, and I will say this, think about that you gotta give back, right, all the time, and be consistent with your giving back. And um, once I was elected EDA, and I'm not saying this to be haughty or boastful, but I never stopped giving back because I did believe it was for life. I was honored to be part of the group. And so whether it was being a chapter advisor or serving on a committee or speaking at a school, I was just honored to do it because this is an amazing organization. And I will rant just a little bit longer, but I get frustrated when I hear people saying they can't come to stuff and they can't do stuff, and they're busy with their Rotary meeting or their Kiwanis meeting, and those are all great organizations, but we are the only Lions Club that any SA should have to be part of, right? We should be doing all the things that those other organizations are doing in our communities. If you look at the people who we have involved and who are our members, this is an organization for life, and we should have to go no further than here, and we just develop further what we're trying to do in the undergraduate for our I won't say undergraduate, for our non-collegiate members. We should be doing as those that have graduated. So.
Okay, good stuff, good stuff. So moving forward, as a fraternity, collectively and as fraternity brothers individually, what can we do as we're celebrating Black History Month? I'm a firm believer that Black history is 365. So 365, you see me celebrating.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
Yeah. So moving forward, not just celebrating Black History 365, but also celebrating all of the diversity that is represented in our organization 365. How do we get to that point as a fraternity, and what is it that fraternity brothers can do, whether you're an alum, whether you're in your collegiate career? What can we all bring to the table to make these celebrations possible, viable, genuine, and intentional?
Well, it's as you said, it should be 365. We shouldn't have to segment anything, right? It should all be should be like this, right? Because all these things are connected, but and it's the shortest month. I won't get into that. I know why, but it all goes back to honoring President Lincoln's. But I think what we need to do is, as I mentioned before, we need to think about how we tell our story. But we need to make sure that even for some of our committees and those need to be intentional too, right? So because in order to feel comfortable to run for something, right, and to see people, whether are province archons or chapter advisors, we need to think about how can we be more intentional about that process from a national level. And then, some of the things that we've done that I think are, I talked to some people about, but I hope one day we can start doing some TED Talkish type events, that are like little snippets where we can talk to people and tell their stories and put those things out there in social media. So when people hear of SAE and they look and they don't just see, Ben who's, on the council, but they see other Black brothers that are serving at a chapter level or at a province level, and we have those guys that are doing that, right? But we need to do this more and show them more, and the same thing for all of our brothers of all our ethnicities and orientations, and they need to feel comfortable and open about those things and not have to hide those things because that's who they are. And if you can't fully be yourself, you're not giving your best self, right? And so that's got to be part of the process. I also think that we got to get to a point where we stop apologizing, right? So telling our story doesn't mean we're apologizing for things completely, right? We're acknowledging and we're constantly improving. And I think we don't have to do everything alone. There are too many other organizations that can do things that show we're supportive, that talk about other things that we should be celebrating, but we can partner with those organizations. We can't do everything well. And so how do we bring some of those things, education programs, like the Smithsonian African American Museum does a great storytelling of history and programs. We don't have to create content, but we can show our brothers where that content is, right? And give people the openness and understanding of what people are dealing with and why these causes are out there. And it doesn't have to be shoving things down people's throat. I hate using that term, but we need to educate. It's part of why fraternity was created, right? Was education, and so that doesn't hurt any of us.
Mhm.
Did I
Yeah,
answer your question? I feel
you
like I.
definitely did. No, 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 you did. And I think that in moving forward as brothers and as we get ready to close the conversation, it is important to access those resources, but it's also important because I before coming to the Fraternity Service Center, I worked for a predominantly white research company. And one of the things that was the largest burden was having to educate. But then when I found that there were resources that I could say, hey, I think this is a good TED Talk, this is a good podcast, this is a good book, this is a good documentary to watch. And then it'll start a conversation. It takes some of that burden off, or some of that pressure off of individuals feeling the need or the burden to also, spark those conversations amongst individuals.
You're right. So the equity, and as I think I chair the Equity, Inclusion, and Diversity Committee, and we chose those letters specifically in that order, because the equity piece is important, and inclusion, right? The old saying is, equity is inviting somebody to a dance, right? But inclusion and belonging is actually asking them to dance. And so there's a big difference there when you do these things. And so we're looking at all those things. Um, how do we actually have gone through a process and have changed our kind of values to aspirational statement. We're not calling it a mission statement. We're calling it an aspirational statement because it's who we want to be and who we think the organization should be. We're asking to get rid of the word colony at convention, and although it hadn't impacted me directly, I had several people, including our expansion team, that mentioned that some colleges and universities have not the best comments when they hear the word colonization because it sounds not like the 13 original colonies like I think of, but it sounds like colonization, right? So those things are important, and we are supporting our governance counterparts with getting rid of the word alumni, just for the simple fact that You don't graduate from SAE. So there are some things that we're doing, and we hope to have our website completed by the end of March, and it'll have resources. Uh, we do have someone in a home office that wrote a book recently that just got published. Who is it, and what's the title of that book?
Yeah. So yeah, I just wrote a book, To Those Who Believe, here in the office, and it's just honoring those heroes in my life who kind of helped me navigate these areas of success, being able to work within the White House, with the city of Chicago mayor's office, and just really being able to have successful values and leadership things, the things that originally led me to SAE.
Well, congratulations. I'm gonna Supreme Council member is gonna request a signed copy.
Okay.
Um, but I think those kind of things, and we're gonna have a page with link and resources to start that kind of dialogue. And then the next thing we're doing is we'll be working with our ESR and talking about, and his team, about how do we start providing education. So some of the same language we're all using, right? Like if you and I say the word microaggressions, we kind of know what we're talking about, but some people have no idea what that word means. And it doesn't mean they're insensitive, they just don't know what the word microaggression means. And so if we can be more respectful, I've heard this said a lot. I think I think Judge Brandt may have said this too, like that partisanship should never enter our brotherhood, right? We are brothers, and I do believe that. I think that the outside stuff that's dividing our country should not happen in our walls. And some people say that's naive, but I say no, it's not naive, because if we're brothers, we can respectfully disagree like family members do, right? Brothers do that. My cousin is like my brother. We disagree and have good debates on some things, but we love each other, we respect each other, and we never go down a path of insulting. Um, and we should be doing the same thing within our brotherhood, right? We should remember that if you're going to call somebody brother, act like it, right? Act like that person's your brother. And the moment you try to dismiss them because they don't think the same way you do, and they don't believe exactly the same thing you do, you're not being a good brother either, right? So it's easy to be haughty and do this, but we should be doing this, right? And bringing people closer, because that just makes us stronger. And we've got some amazing people out there, and we just want to keep growing and making our brotherhood even better than it is now.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Good stuff. So I just want to thank you for taking time out to have
Oh,
this
you're welcome.
conversation. I think it is a beautiful way to end the celebration, the official celebration of Black History Month. But I definitely urge everyone who will get this to continue celebrating Black History Month and every diversity, and every background, and the important contributions that have been made. But Brother Ben Johnson, thank you so much for your
Thank
insight.
you, sir.